Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The soil in my backyard tastes like pennies. I know because I accidentally got some in my mouth this morning while planting tomatoes. That metallic tang still won't leave, no matter how much coffee I drink. But here's the thing that's been keeping me up at night. The tomatoes I planted last week, they're already 6 feet tall, and they're not growing tomatoes. If you're still listening after that, then maybe you'll understand why I need to tell someone about this. Anyone. Because what's happening in my garden might already be happening in yours too. So, before we dive into this nightmare, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. And if you've ever found something growing in your yard that you didn't plant, leave a comment below. I need to know I'm not alone in this. And now, our story begins. 3 months ago, my grandmother passed away and left me her house in Salem, Oregon. Not the witchy Salem, just a quiet suburb where the biggest excitement is usually the annual Strawberry Festival. The house sat on Maple Street, a cozy craftsman with peeling yellow paint and a wraparound porch that creaked like old bones. I'd spent summers there as a kid, catching fireflies in mason jars and eating blackberries straight from the thorny vines that grew wild along the back fence. Grandma Eleanor always had the most beautiful garden. Neighbors would stop by just to admire her roses, each bloom as big as a dinner plate and fragrant enough to make you dizzy. The day I moved in, March 15th, the garden was nothing but dead stalks and brown earth. Winter had been harsh, and without Grandma's careful tending, everything had withered. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug warm in my hands, staring at that barren patch of land. "I'll bring it back, Grandma," I whispered to the empty house. "I promise." The first few weeks were normal. I cleared the dead plants, turned the soil, added fresh compost from the local garden center. The teenager who loaded the bags into my car, Derek, according to his name tag, mentioned something odd. "You're the third person today buying soil for a dead garden," he said, hefting a 40-pound bag. "Must be something in the air. Everyone's gardens died weird this winter." I didn't think much of it then. Oregon winters can be brutal, especially with climate change making weather patterns increasingly unpredictable. But looking back, that should have been my first warning. I started simple: tomatoes, bell peppers, some herbs, the basics. Every morning, I'd water them before my remote work shift began, checking for signs of growth. Nothing happened for 2 weeks. Then, overnight, everything changed. I woke up on April 1st. Yeah, April Fool's Day, which feels like the universe's sick joke now, and found my garden transformed. Where I'd planted 6 tomato seedlings, there were now 6 plants nearly 3 feet tall, but the leaves, God, the leaves were wrong. Instead of the familiar serrated edges of tomato plants, these had smooth, waxy surfaces that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. My hands shook as I touched one. The leaf was warm. Actually warm, like it had its own internal heat source. And when I pulled my hand back, my fingertips were stained purple. I called the garden center. Derek answered on the 3rd ring. "Ace Hardware Garden Center, this is Derek." "Hi, Derek, this is Sarah. I bought soil from you a couple of weeks ago. I have a question about plant growth." There was a pause. Then, "Let me guess. Something's growing that you didn't plant." My stomach dropped. "How did you—" "You're not the first to call. Listen, I'm not supposed to say this, but 3 other customers have reported the same thing. Plants growing overnight. Wrong leaves. Some of them are growing. Other things." "Other things?" Derek lowered his voice. "One lady swears her cucumber vines are growing tiny bells, like actual metal bells. Another guy says his carrots came up as something else entirely. Won't say what." The line crackled with static. When Derek spoke again, his voice was different, urgent. "My manager's coming. But Sarah, don't eat anything from that garden. And whatever you do, don't let it spread to your neighbor's yard." He hung up before I could ask what he meant. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those wrong leaves shimmering in the darkness. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went to the kitchen for water. The motion sensor light in the backyard triggered as I passed the window. There were more plants now. I pressed my face against the glass, breath fogging the cold surface. Where there had been 6 tall plants that morning, there were now at least 20. They swayed in the windless night, a synchronized dance that made my skin crawl. I grabbed a flashlight and my phone. Stupid, I know, but I needed to document this, and stepped onto the back porch. The air smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, but sweet, like overripe fruit mixed with something medicinal. The beam of my flashlight caught the first plant and I nearly dropped the phone. The tomato plant, or whatever it was, had grown another 2 feet since morning, and hanging from its branches weren't tomatoes. They were eyes. Okay, not literal eyes. That's what my panicked brain thought at first. But as I forced myself to look closer, to be rational, I saw they were fruits. Round, about the size of tennis balls, with a deep purple skin that had a wet shine to it. In the center of each fruit was a pale circle with a dark spot in the middle. They looked exactly like irises. Purple irises with dilated pupils. I took a dozen photos, my hands shaking so badly that most came out blurred. One clear shot showed the fruit in detail. The way the pupil seemed to track the movement of my flashlight. A trick of the light, I told myself, just pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces and eyes in random patterns. But then one of them blinked. Not all at once, just one fruit on the lowest branch. A slow, deliberate closing of that pale center, like an eyelid sliding shut, then open again. I stumbled backward, tripped over the garden hose, and went down hard. My phone skittered across the porch. When I scrambled to retrieve it, the screen was cracked, but still functional. I ran inside, slammed the door, and twisted the deadbolt. From the kitchen window, I could see the plants still swaying. And now, I swear, they were leaning toward the house. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. Grandma's greenhouse stood at the back of the property, a small glass structure I hadn't entered yet. She'd always kept it locked, telling me as a child that some plants were not for little hands. The padlock was rusty but yielded to bolt cutters. Inside, the air was thick and humid despite months of abandonment. Shelves lined the walls, filled with mason jars of seeds, dried herbs, and journals. Dozens of journals dating back decades. I grabbed the most recent one, 2023, and flipped it open. Grandma's careful handwriting filled the pages. March 3rd. The soil speaks louder now. It remembers what was before the houses, before the streets, before humans thought they could tame it. March 15th. Neighbor's dog went missing. Found fur in the garden. The moonflowers are blooming out of season. They smell like Nathan's cologne. Nathan, who died in 1962. March 27th. I've kept them contained for 60 years. The barriers are weakening. The new development on Riverside disturbed something that should have stayed buried. The soil is waking up. April 1st. If you're reading this, Sarah, then I'm gone, and the garden has chosen you. The seeds in jar #47 are the only thing that keeps them dormant. Plant them in a circle. Salt the earth between. Never let them fruit. And whatever grows, do not let it spread beyond our fence. I searched the shelves frantically until I found jar #47. Inside were seeds unlike anything I'd ever seen. Each one a perfect spiral of silver and black, like tiny galaxies frozen in time. They felt cold through the glass. When I turned back to the journal, a loose photograph fell out. It showed my grandmother as a young woman, standing in the garden with a man I didn't recognize. Behind them, the plants were tall and wrong, just like mine. But it was their faces that made me drop the journal. They were both smiling, but their eyes were purple, with dark centers, just like the fruits hanging in my garden. By afternoon, I'd planted Grandma's seeds in a circle around the infected garden, just as her journal instructed. The moment the last seed touched soil, the eye fruits on my plants began to close, like flowers shutting for the night. The plants stopped their swaying. For a moment, I thought I'd fixed it. Then Mrs. Chen from next door screamed. I found her standing at our shared fence, pointing at her prized rose bushes. The roses, her beautiful, pink Mr. Lincoln roses, were blooming. But each bloom had teeth. Tiny, perfect, pearl-white teeth arranged in circular rows like some nightmare lamprey. "They were normal this morning," she gasped. "I've been growing roses for 30 years. This can't be." I helped her inside, made her tea, and tried to explain without sounding insane. "But how do you tell your 70-year-old neighbor that your grandmother spent 60 years containing some kind of botanical nightmare? That the soil itself might be infected with something ancient and hungry?" Mrs. Chen surprised me. She set down her teacup with steady hands and said, "I always wondered about Eleanor's garden. Things grew too well there. And sometimes I'd see lights at night, dancing between the plants like fireflies, but wrong-colored, blue and purple and sick yellow." We spent the afternoon going door to door, checking gardens. The Johnsons' corn was growing backwards, into the ground instead of up. The young couple in the blue house found their newly planted lavender producing thorns as long as fingers. Even the community garden at the end of the street was affected. The children's sunflower project had become a forest of stalks that whispered when the wind blew through them. But it was the empty lot on Riverside that made everything click. 6 months ago, developers had broken ground there for new condos. They dug deep, really deep, for underground parking. Mrs. Chen remembered the construction halting suddenly. The workers just left one day and never came back. The hole was filled in hastily, but nothing would grow there now. Just bare black earth that smelled like copper. I thought about Grandma's journal entry. The new development on Riverside disturbed something that should have stayed buried. As we stood at the edge of that barren lot, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dead zone was shrinking. Grass was beginning to creep in from the edges, but it was the wrong color, too green, too vibrant. And if you looked closely, really closely, each blade had a tiny eye at its tip. That night, I couldn't stay home. The sound of growing things filled the darkness. A rustling, stretching, reaching sound that made sleep impossible. I grabbed Grandma's journals and drove to the 24-hour diner on Highway 99. Under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by truckers and insomniacs, I read. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. In 1962, the town had experienced what the newspapers called a botanical plague. Gardens grew wild overnight. Crops became inedible, producing fruits that caused hallucinations. 17 people went missing. They were never found, but Grandma's journal had a list of names. 17 names. And beside each one, a plant. Nathan Morrison, moonflowers. Betty Carver, roses. James Liu, apple tree. The list went on. Each missing person had become... No, that was insane. But Grandma's notes were clear. Somehow, the soil had absorbed them, transformed them. And now, it was trying to grow them back. My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. "Come quickly, something's happening." I drove back to find the entire neighborhood standing in the street. In the darkness, our gardens were glowing. A soft, bioluminescent pulse that synchronized across property lines. Like a heartbeat, like breathing. And in my backyard, the circle of Grandma's guardian seeds had sprouted. The plants that emerged were unlike anything in any botany textbook. They were geometric, crystalline, more like living architecture than vegetation. They formed a barrier, a cage, around the infected garden, but the cage was cracking. "Everyone needs to leave," I announced to the gathered neighbors. "Pack what you can. Get out of town for a few days." "And go where?" Mr. Johnson demanded. "This is our home." But even as he spoke, his corn, the backwards growing corn, burst through his lawn. The stalks were pale and wrong, and from their silk tassels came a sound like children laughing. If you listen to children laughing backwards, underwater, in a dream about drowning, that convinced them. Within an hour, the street was empty except for Mrs. Chen and me. She refused to leave. "I'm 83 years old," she said firmly. "I've lived here 40 years. If the earth wants me, it can have me, but I'm not running." Together, we returned to my backyard. The crystalline plants had grown taller, their geometric forms creating complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. Inside their barrier, the eye fruit plants had changed again. They were bearing new fruit now, fruit that looked exactly like human faces. I recognized one immediately, Nathan Morrison, the first name on Grandma's list. His features were perfect, rendered in plant matter, eyes closed as if sleeping. As we watched, his mouth opened. No sound came out, but his lips formed words. "Let us go." Mrs. Chen grabbed my hand. "Your grandmother told me once. She said the earth has a long memory, longer than ours. It remembers when this was all forest, when things that weren't quite human lived in the trees, when the boundary between plant and animal was negotiable. She trapped them," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. All those missing people in 1962, they didn't die. They became part of the soil, part of the garden, and Grandma's been keeping them contained ever since. "But now she's gone," Mrs. Chen said, "and they want out." The crystalline barrier was definitely failing now. Cracks spread through the geometric forms like fractures in glass, and beyond them, the garden was transforming into something else. The plants were merging, growing together into shapes that suggested bodies. Human bodies made of leaves and stems and those horrible eye fruits. I ran back to the greenhouse, searching desperately through Grandma's journals for a solution. In the last entry, dated just a week before her death, I found it. "The binding is failing. My time is almost up. Sarah, if you're reading this, there's only one way to stop it. The soil must be fed. It's hungry after all these years. Feed it something new, and it will sleep again. For a while. I'm sorry, my dear one. I'm so sorry. The seeds in jar #13 are for you. Plant them only if you're ready. They'll make the choice quick, painless, and you'll dream forever in the garden, keeping the others asleep. There's another way. Destroy the original. It's buried beneath the greenhouse. But if you disturb it, there's no controlling what happens next." I found jar #13. The seeds inside were beautiful, pearl white and glowing faintly. They looked like tears crystallized into perfect spheres. My hands shook as I held them. Outside, I heard Mrs. Chen scream. The garden had broken free. Plant people stumbled across my lawn, their movements jerky and wrong. They had faces, human faces, but their bodies were woven from vines and roots. Eye fruits dangled from their limbs like bizarre ornaments. They moved toward the street, toward the empty houses, toward the town beyond. Mrs. Chen was backing away from her rose bush, which had uprooted itself and was crawling toward her on thorny tentacles. The teeth in its blooms were chattering. I had seconds to decide, take Grandma's way out, sacrifice myself to keep them contained, or risk everything by digging up whatever was buried beneath the greenhouse. I chose to dig. The greenhouse floor was concrete, but old and cracked. I grabbed a pickaxe from the tool shed and started swinging. Mrs. Chen joined me using a shovel. Behind us, the plant people pressed against the windows, their faces leaving smears of green sap on the glass. The concrete gave way to earth. Black earth that smelled like pennies and old bones. We dug frantically as the greenhouse door began to splinter. 3 feet down, my pickaxe hit something solid. Not stone, not metal, a seed. A seed the size of a basketball, black as night, with veins of silver running through it like neural pathways. It pulsed with its own heartbeat. And when I touched it, I saw everything. The time before, when this land was young and the boundaries between kingdoms of life were fluid. When the first seed fell from somewhere else, somewhere between the stars, and took root in Oregon soil. How it grew and spread, learning to mimic, to absorb, to become. How the native people knew to avoid this valley. How the settlers didn't. 1962 wasn't the first time. It happened every 60 years or so. The soil would wake, hungry, and take what it needed. Then sleep again. Grandma had found a way to control it, to feed it little bits, a missing pet here, a wild animal there, to keep it satiated. But development had disturbed its roots. Climate change had altered its cycles. And now it was awake and starving. Together, Mrs. Chen said, grabbing one side of the massive seed, we lifted it. God, it was heavy. And the moment it left the earth, everything stopped. The plant people froze mid-step. The crawling roses went still. Even the wind died. Then the seed cracked. Light poured out, not regular light, but something that made my eyes water and my brain itch. Inside the seed was another seed, and inside that another. Fractals all the way down to infinity, or up to infinity. Direction didn't matter anymore. A voice spoke, not with words, but with meaning that planted itself directly in my mind. Choose. Feed us and sleep. Free us and wake, or plant us anew and become the garden yourself. I thought about Grandma. 60 years of tending this nightmare. 60 years of keeping the town safe. She'd made her choice. I thought about the missing people, Nathan Morrison and the others. Were they suffering? Or were they dreaming, as Grandma's journal suggested? I thought about the future. Climate change. Development. How many more disturbances before this thing could no longer be contained? There's a fourth option, I said to the seed, to the garden, to whatever intelligence lurked in the soil. I told it about other places, empty places, the vast forests of Canada, the uninhabited stretches of Alaska, places where it could grow without human interference, where it could be what it was without causing harm. The light from the seed pulsed, considering. Bargain, it said. We take volunteers, willing souls who wish to dream in green. In exchange, we travel, find new soil. Far from your kind. I looked at Mrs. Chen. She nodded slowly. How many volunteers? I asked. One from each garden we've touched. They come willing, or we stay. My mind raced. The Johnsons were gone. The young couple had fled, but there were others who hadn't left. Others who might actually want this. Give us 3 days, I said. The seed's light dimmed. 3 sunrises. Then we feed, or we feast. It took 2 days to find them. 7 people, all elderly, all alone, all tired. Mr. Petrov, whose wife had died last spring. Miss Williams, facing another round of chemo. Others who whispered to me about pain, about loneliness, about being ready for something else. They came to my garden on the 3rd morning. No goodbyes, no tears. Just quiet acceptance. Will we dream? Miss Williams asked. I thought about the faces in the fruits, the way Nathan Morrison's lips had moved. I think so, maybe forever. One by one, they took the pearl-white seeds from jar hash 13, swallowed them with glasses of water, sat in chairs among the eye-fruit plants and closed their eyes. The transformation was gentle. Their skin slowly took on the texture of bark. Their hair became leaves. Their faces peaceful as they merged with the garden. When it was done, 7 new plants stood where they had been. Beautiful plants with silver leaves and flowers that looked like stars. The seed's light exploded outward. Every infected plant in the neighborhood, every wrong growing thing, dissolved into points of light. The lights swirled together, a galaxy of possibilities, and then shot northward like a green comet. The gardens were empty, normal, dead. That was 6 weeks ago. The neighbors have returned. New plants grow where the old ones were. Regular plants that produce regular fruits. Mrs. Chen and I never speak about that night. The others assume there was some kind of chemical spill that killed everything. The explanation satisfies them, but sometimes late at night I check my phone. There's a folder of photos I can't bring myself to delete. Blurry shots of eye fruits and plant people in that impossible seed. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can smell it. That sweet medicinal scent, coming from the north, growing stronger. Last week, I got a postcard, no return address. The picture showed a forest in Alaska. Trees taller than buildings, their canopy so thick it blocked out the sky. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, "We dream in green. The soil sings lullabies. Thank you." I've started a new garden. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Normal things that grow at normal speeds. But every morning I check them carefully. Look for leaves that shimmer. For fruits with eyes. For any sign that it's starting again. Because here's what keeps me up at night. That thing, whatever it was, it learned. It learned about cars and roads and human transportation. It learned that there are other places to grow. And if it learned all that, what else did it learn? What else is it learning up there in the dark forests where no one goes and no one watches? So, that's my story. Maybe you think I'm crazy. Maybe you're already checking your own garden, looking for plants you didn't put there. Maybe you've noticed things growing too fast, too wrong, too aware. If you have, if your soil tastes like pennies, if your plants watch you back, don't wait. Don't assume it's your imagination. And whatever you do, don't let it spread. Because somewhere in Alaska, in those vast untouched forests, 7 dreamers tend a garden that never sleeps. They're happy, I think. I hope. But the thing that grows there, the thing that fell from between the stars, it's still hungry. And now it knows we're here. Before you go, check your garden one more time tonight. Use a flashlight. Look closely at anything you didn't plant. And if you find something wrong, something with eyes or teeth or faces, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are. Tell me what's growing. We need to know how far it's spread. Because if my grandmother's journals are right, if the 60-year cycle is real, then we're due for another awakening. And this time, there might not be enough volunteers to satisfy it. This time, it might not ask. Sweet dreams. And don't forget to subscribe. You'll want to know when I post the update, if there is one. Story number 2. The coffee shop receipt crinkled in my hand. Sarah's handwriting. Messy as always. Love you, see you tomorrow. With a little heart drawn next to it. I stared at those words, knowing they were lies. Not because she meant to lie, but because tomorrow she wouldn't remember writing them. Tomorrow she wouldn't remember me at all. If you're listening to this right now, lying in your bed, maybe with the lights dimmed, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story, this is my confession. And by the time you finish listening, you might be the only person left who knows I exist. Comment below if you've ever felt invisible, like the world just forgets you're there. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's worse than that. So much worse. The story begins now. My name is David Chen, and exactly 1,247 days ago, everyone I loved started forgetting me after 24 hours. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because Sarah and I always got tacos on Tuesdays at this little place on Maple Street. She'd been my girlfriend for 3 years. We shared an apartment above the old bookstore on 5th, You know, the one with the creaky stairs that sounded like they were crying every time you walked up them. That morning, I woke up to find Sarah staring at me. Not the warm, sleepy way she usually looked at me in the mornings. She was pressed against the far edge of the bed, eyes wide, hand clutching her phone like it was a weapon. "Who are you?" Her voice came out strangled. "Why are you in my bed?" I laughed. Had to be a joke, right? "Very funny, babe. Coffee?" But she scrambled out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat we kept by the closet. "I'm calling the police. Get out right now." The way she said it, the genuine terror in her eyes. My stomach dropped. "Sarah, it's me, David. We've been together for 3 years. We went to that Italian place last night. You had the carbonara. You always get the carbonara even though it gives you heartburn." She was already dialing 911. I grabbed my wallet from the nightstand, flipped it open to show her the photos. Us at Niagara Falls. Her birthday party last month. Our trip to Portland. But when she looked at them, her face went pale. These are fake. You photoshopped these. Oh God, you're one of those stalkers." The police arrived in 7 minutes. 7 minutes of me desperately trying to convince the woman I loved that I wasn't a stranger. That I belonged there. That we'd made love just hours ago. That she'd whispered she loved me before falling asleep with her head on my chest. The officers were professional. They found my name on the lease, my clothes in the closet, my toothbrush next to hers. But Sarah kept shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know him. I've never seen him before. Please, just make him leave." They couldn't arrest me. Everything proved I lived there. But they strongly suggested I find somewhere else to stay. Just for the night. Let everyone calm down. I spent that day at my parents' house in the suburbs. Mom made me tomato soup. The kind with the little goldfish crackers floating on top, just like when I was sick as a kid. Dad kept shooting me these worried looks over his newspaper. They believed me, of course. Why wouldn't they? I was their son. "Maybe she had a seizure," Mom suggested, stirring her tea nervously. Or hit her head? Should we take her to the hospital? But I knew Sarah was fine. I'd seen the recognition flicker in her eyes for just a second when I'd mentioned the carbonara. Something else was happening. Something worse than amnesia. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a text, an explanation, an apology, anything. But Sarah had blocked my number. When I tried calling from Dad's phone, she threatened to get a restraining order. At exactly 6:47 a.m. the next morning, Wednesday, now, my phone rang. Mom. "David, honey, why aren't you in your room? Your father and we found your number in the phone. Are you one of David's friends from college?" The words hit me like ice water. "Mom, it's me. Your son. I'm at Casey's apartment downtown. You dropped me off here yesterday, remember? You made me soup?" Silence. Then, carefully, like she was talking to a stranger, which I guess I was now. "I'm sorry, but we don't have a son. Is this some kind of prank?" I drove home, if I could still call it that, breaking every speed limit. Burst through the front door to find my parents in the kitchen, coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. The look on their faces, polite confusion mixed with growing alarm. "Young man, you can't just barge in here," Dad said, standing up. He was wearing the sweater I'd given him for Christmas. The one with the tiny reindeer that he pretended to hate but wore every chance he got. "Dad, please, look at me. Really look at me. I'm David, your son. I played Little League for the Tigers. You coached. I struck out in the championship game and you told me it didn't matter because I'd tried my best. You said that's all that mattered." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Hope? But then it was gone, replaced by that polite, distant stare. "I think you're confused, son. We can't help you." I found myself standing on the porch of the house I'd grown up in, watching my parents through the window as they called the police. Again. 24 hours. That's how long anyone who loved me could remember me. I tested it. God help me, I tested it like some kind of sick experiment. My best friend Jake, we'd known each other since 4th grade. Every Thursday we played basketball at the Y. When I showed up that week, he looked right through me. "Court's taken, man," he said, dribbling the ball. "Maybe wait for the next game?" "Jake, it's me, David. We literally texted yesterday about the Lakers game." He pulled out his phone, frowning, scrolled through his messages. His face went white. There they were. Dozens of texts between us. Photos. Years of friendship documented in digital form. But when he looked up at me, there was nothing. No recognition. Just growing unease. "This is messed up, man. How did you fake these?" 24 hours, exactly. I could meet someone new, become friends, even get close to them. But the moment I felt real affection, the moment they mattered, the countdown started. 24 hours later, I was erased from their memory like I'd never existed. I tried everything. Doctors who forgot me the moment they started to care about my case. Therapists who'd remember me for weeks until that one session where we'd break through, where they'd really connect with me. Gone the next day. I even tried online relationships, thinking maybe distance would help. But the moment someone genuinely started to care, 24 hours. Delete. The cruelest part, the evidence remained, photos, texts, voicemails, legal documents, all proof that I existed, that I'd been part of their lives, but to them it was all fake. Elaborate forgeries by a stranger trying to insert himself into their world. Casey, my college roommate. He lasted the longest, 2 months of casual friendship before he mentioned I was like the brother he'd never had. 24 hours later, he changed the locks. I learned to live differently. Shallow connections only. Surface-level interactions. The moment I felt myself caring too much or sensed someone caring about me, I'd pull back, ghost them before they could ghost me. I got a job at a call center. Perfect, really. Brief interactions with people I'd never meet. My supervisor, Janet, was professionally distant. We'd worked together for 8 months without incident. She didn't particularly like or dislike me. I was just employee number 447. That's when I met Luna. She worked the night shift. Always wore these oversized hoodies that swallowed her small frame. She'd bring thermoses of tea that smelled like cinnamon and something else. Something that made you think of autumn afternoons and old books. We didn't talk at first, just nodded at each other during shift changes. Safe, distant. But one night I found her crying in the break room. "Sorry," she said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm fine, just..." You ever feel like you're watching life through a window? Like you're not really participating? I almost walked away. Should have walked away. Instead, I sat down across from her. Every day, she looked at me then, really looked. Like she was seeing something beyond the surface. "You're the guy from day shift, David, right?" "Yeah, I'm Luna." She smiled, and it was like moonlight breaking through clouds. "Want some tea? It's my grandmother's recipe. She said it helps with loneliness." I should have said no, should have made an excuse and left. But the break room was dimly lit, and her tea smelled like comfort, and I was so tired of being alone. We became break room friends. 15 minutes during shift change, that's all. She'd share her tea, I'd share vending machine cookies. We talked about safe things, TV shows, weather, the way Janet walked like she was perpetually stepping on Legos. "You're different," Luna said one night, about 3 weeks into our ritual. "Careful, like you're afraid of breaking something." "Maybe I am." She tilted her head, studying me. "What happened to you, David Chen?" The way she said my full name, like she'd been thinking about it, practicing it. I felt the familiar warmth in my chest, the dangerous warmth that meant I was starting to care. I should go, shift's starting, but she caught my hand as I stood. Her fingers were cold from holding her tea mug. Running away doesn't fix anything. Trust me, I've tried. I pulled away gently, had to. Sometimes running is all you have. I changed my shift schedule, started leaving early, arriving late. Anything to avoid those 15 minutes. But Luna adapted. She'd leave notes in my locker. Simple things. Hope your day was good. Try this tea bag, it's lavender. The vending machine is broken, brought extra cookies. I kept every note, stupid, I know, but they were proof that someone noticed me, even if just in passing. Then came the night of the storm. November rain hammering the windows like it was trying to break in. The power kept flickering, making our computer screen strobe. Half the night shift called out, but Luna was there, hood up, typing away. I was heading to my car when I saw her in the parking lot. Her ancient Honda wouldn't start. She was soaked, still turning the key like willpower alone could bring the engine to life. "Need a jump?" I called out, already knowing I was making a mistake. She looked up, rain streaming down her face. "David, I thought you left an hour ago." Forgot something, a lie. I'd been sitting in my car waiting for her shift to end, watching over her like some kind of guardian angel. Pathetic. My battery's been dying for weeks. I just keep pretending it'll fix itself. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Story of my life, right? I pulled my car around, attached the jumper cables. While we waited for her battery to charge, she sat in my passenger seat, shivering. "Why do you avoid me?" she asked suddenly. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, it's not you." "Then what?" I gripped the steering wheel. Outside, the rain created rivers in the parking lot. "What if I told you something insane, something you wouldn't believe? Try me." So I did. Sitting in that car, rain drumming on the roof, I told her everything. The forgetting, the 24 hours, the loneliness that ate at me like acid. She listened without interrupting, her dark eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My grandmother used to tell me stories about people like you." "People like me?" "Cursed, that's what she called it. Said there were those who walked between worlds. Never fully seen, never fully known. She said love was their poison and their cure." "Your grandmother sounds like she watched too many movies." Luna smiled sadly. She knew things, real things. The tea recipe, it's not just for loneliness, it's for remembering. My heart stuttered. Remembering what? The things we're not supposed to forget. She pulled out her thermos, poured some into the cap. The steam rose between us, smelling of cinnamon and secrets. Drink. I don't know why I drank it. Desperation, maybe, or maybe because the way she looked at me like I was already disappearing made me want to try anything. The tea was hot, almost burning. It tasted like autumn and regret and something else. Something that made my memories feel more solid, more real. "I see you, David Chen," Luna whispered. "I see you, and I won't forget." That's what they all say. Then 24 hours pass and she kissed me, soft, quick, like sealing a promise. Then we have 24 hours. Let's make them count. We drove through the rain-soaked streets of Portland. Luna directed me to places I'd never seen despite living here for years. A 24-hour diner that served breakfast all day. A park where the trees grew in perfect spirals. A bridge where she said people came to make wishes they couldn't voice anywhere else. "Tell me about before," she said, digging into her stack of pancakes at 3 a.m., before the forgetting started. So I told her about Sarah, about Sunday mornings in bed, about my parents and game nights where Mom always cheated at Scrabble, about Jake and our terrible garage band that practiced in his basement until the neighbors complained. "You had a beautiful life," she said softly. I thought I did. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I didn't appreciate it enough. Or maybe... She reached across the table, syrup sticky on her fingers. Maybe something wanted to take it from you, something that feeds on connection, on love. That's crazy. Is it? You're living proof that crazy is relative. She pulled out a worn notebook from her hoodie. My grandmother. She documented things, patterns, people who disappeared not physically but from memory. You're not the first, David. I stared at the pages she showed me, names, dates, stories in her grandmother's careful handwriting, all describing the same thing. Loved ones forgetting. 24 hours, isolation. What happened to them? Luna's face darkened. They faded. Eventually, even strangers stopped seeing them. They became nothing. My hands shook. How long do I have? I don't know, but... She closed the notebook. Grandmother believed there was a way to break it. The curse feeds on isolation, on the pain of being forgotten. But if someone could remember despite the curse, you think you can remember me? I'm going to try. She looked at her watch. We have 18 hours left. Tell me everything, every detail, every memory. I'm going to hold on to you so tight that nothing can make me let go. We spent the day creating anchors. That's what Luna called them. Memory anchors. We took photos, but more than that. She had me write on her arms, messages and permanent marker. David Chen exists. He loves horror movies but covers his eyes during scary parts. He makes the best grilled cheese at 2 a.m. He's real, he's real, he's real. We recorded videos on her phone, me telling stories, sharing jokes, singing badly to prove I was human and flawed, and there. Why are you doing this? I asked as she drew my face in her sketchbook, tongue poking out in concentration. Because I know what it's like to be invisible, she said. To scream and have no one hear you. My whole life, I felt like a ghost. Then I saw you, trying so hard not to be seen. And I recognized myself. Luna. Also, she added, smudging charcoal to shadow my cheekbones, I think I'm falling in love with you, which, given the circumstances, is either very stupid or very brave. Very stupid, I said. Good thing I've never been smart. She checked her watch. 6 hours. As the hours ticked down, something strange happened. The world around us seemed to thin. Colors became less vibrant. Sounds grew muffled. It was like reality itself was preparing to edit me out. Do you feel that? Luna asked, gripping my hand tighter. Yeah, it's getting worse. We were back in her apartment now. A studio above a Chinese restaurant that made the whole place smell like ginger and soy sauce. She'd covered every surface with our photos from today. The walls looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Tell me about the first time you realized you were being forgotten, she said, pulling me onto her threadbare couch. I told you, Sarah, no, really tell me. Close your eyes. Put me there. So I did. I told her about the confusion that turned to terror, the way Sarah's love had turned to fear in her eyes. The heaviness in my chest as I realized I was becoming a stranger to the person who knew me best. I can feel it, Luna whispered. The thing that took your connections. It's here, in the room with us. I opened my eyes. The lights seemed dimmer. Or maybe that was just my vision fading. 2 hours, Luna said. Don't let go of my hand. What if this is cruel? I asked. What if I'm just setting you up for the same pain? Tomorrow you'll wake up with a stranger in your apartment. You'll be scared. You'll call the police. And I'll have to watch you look at me like I'm nothing. Or, she said firmly, I'll remember, because unlike Sarah or your parents or Jake, I know what's coming. I'm prepared, and I choose you, David Chen. Curse and all. The last hour was the hardest. I could feel myself slipping from her mind like water through cupped hands. Her eyes kept losing focus when she looked at me. She'd blink, shake her head, grip my hand tighter. "Tell me your name," she kept saying. "David Chen, tell me you're real." "I'm real. Tell me I love you. You love me." "No," she corrected, voice fierce. "You say it, make it true." "Luna Alvarez loves me." She kissed me as the clock struck the final minute. I could taste the desperation, the determination. When she pulled back, her eyes were already going vacant. "I'm going to remember," she whispered. "I swear, I'm going to—" Midnight. Her hand went slack in mine. Luna blinked. Once. Twice she looked at me, through me, around me. Then, slowly, her eyes focused on our joined hands. She frowned, like someone trying to recall a dream. "I know you." My heart stopped. "Luna? No. Wait, that's not right. I don't know you, but—" She looked around at the photos covering her walls, at her arms covered in smudged writing, at the videos queued up on her phone. "But I should. Oh God, I should know you." "It's okay," I lied, starting to pull away. "I'll go. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "David Chen." She said my name like she was testing its weight. "David Chen, David." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Why can't I remember you? Why do I feel like my heart is breaking for a stranger?" I stood to leave, but she grabbed my wrist. No, this is wrong. This is all wrong. I can feel it. There's a hole where you should be. Like someone cut you out of my memory with scissors." She fumbled for her phone, played one of the videos we'd recorded. Her past self, laughing, saying, "This is David Chen. He exists. He matters. I love him." Over and over. "I said that," she whispered. "Just hours ago. I said that and I meant it. I can feel that I meant it. So why can't I—" She pressed her palms against her temples, face contorting with effort. "Remember. Luna, stop. You'll hurt yourself." "It's not fair." She was sobbing now. I promised I wouldn't forget. I drank the tea. I made the anchors. I loved you. I know I loved you. So why can't I hold on to you?" I knelt in front of her, taking her face in my hands. "Because that's how the curse works. 24 hours, no exceptions. There has to be a way. Grandmother's stories, there has to be a way to break it. Maybe there isn't. Maybe this is just my life now." She shook her head violently. No, I refuse. I refuse to let you disappear." She grabbed her grandmother's notebook, flipping through it with trembling hands. Here. Look. The last entry. "The forgotten can only return through sacrifice. Love is not enough. Memory is not enough. Only when someone chooses to forget themselves can the cursed be remembered." What does that mean? Luna looked up at me, eyes bright with desperate hope. I think it means I have to give up my memories, all of them, make room for yours." "Absolutely not. David, no. I won't let you erase yourself for me. That's not love, that's just another kind of disappearing." She laughed, bitter and broken. "Then what do we do? Just accept it? You fade away while I'm haunted by the ghost of loving you? I don't know." I sat beside her, exhausted. "I'm so tired, Luna. Tired of fighting this. Tired of watching people I care about look at me like I'm dangerous. Maybe it's time to just let go. Don't you dare." She grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "Don't you dare give up. Not when I'm still here. Even if I can't remember you, I'm here." We sat in silence for a while. Luna kept looking at the photos, the videos, the writing on her arms, trying to force the memories that wouldn't come. Then quietly, "Tell me about us." "What?" "I can't remember, but you can. So tell me. Tell me about today. Tell me about falling in love with someone in 24 hours. Make me feel it again." So I did. I told her about the rain and the jumper cables, about pancakes at 3 a.m. and wishes on bridges, about the way she'd drawn me like I was worth preserving, about how she'd fought so hard to hold on to me. As I talked, something strange happened. The room grew warmer. The lights seemed brighter, and Luna started to smile. "I can't remember," she said, "but I can feel it. Here." She pressed her hand to her chest. "You're here. Even if my mind can't hold you, my heart does." "That's not enough," I said. "You deserve to remember the people you love." "Maybe." She leaned against me, and I could feel her heartbeat through her hoodie. Or maybe memory is overrated. Maybe what matters is the choice to keep loving even when we can't remember why. Luna made a decision that night. She would court me again, every day, start fresh. "I'll fall in love with you every 24 hours, she declared. "I'll wake up, see these photos, watch these videos, and I'll choose you, again and again, until we find a way to break this curse." That's insane. I've been told I'm not very smart. She smiled, sad but determined. Besides, look at it this way. Most people get bored in relationships. Things get stale. But us, every day is the first day. Every kiss is the first kiss. That's kind of romantic, right? It's heartbreaking. Yeah, she sighed. That too. I wish I could tell you we found a cure, that Luna's grandmother's tea worked, or that some mystical solution presented itself. But life isn't a fairy tale. Instead, we found something else. A rhythm. A routine. Every morning, Luna wakes up confused and scared. She finds the notes she's left herself, watches the videos, reads the journal entries, and slowly, carefully, she chooses to trust the stranger in her apartment. Some days are harder than others. Some days she can't bridge the gap between knowing and feeling. Some days I have to leave, give her space to process the impossible. But she always calls, always texts. "Come back," she'll say. "I may not remember you, but I miss you." It's been 3 months now. Our strange, fractured love story. She's filled dozens of journals, documenting every day, every conversation, building an external memory to supplement what her mind can't hold. "You know what I realized?" she said last week, or rather, said again, since she has the same realizations repeatedly. Everyone forgets eventually. Alzheimer's, death, time. We all lose the people we love to forgetting, one way or another. We're just doing it faster. That's depressing. Or liberating. We can't take a single day for granted. Every moment matters because it's all we have. She was painting my portrait again. She'd done dozens by now, each one slightly different as she saw me fresh each time. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Choosing this? Choosing me?" She paused, brush hovering over canvas. "Ask me tomorrow." "You won't remember tomorrow." "Then I guess you'll have to remind me." She smiled, paint-stained and beautiful. "That's your job now, David Chen, to remind me that I chose you, that I choose you, present tense, always present tense. I don't know how long we can maintain this. The curse seems to be evolving, adapting. Some days, even strangers seem to have trouble focusing on me. I catch people looking through me in stores, forgetting I'm standing in line. But Luna keeps fighting. Every morning, she wakes up and chooses to believe in a love she can't remember. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us really have. The choice to keep loving despite the forgetting. If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for remembering my story, even if just for tonight. Tomorrow you might forget the details. The names might fade, but maybe you'll remember the feeling. The idea that love persists even when memory fails. And if you see someone who seems familiar but strange, someone who looks at you like you should know them, maybe give them a chance. We're all fighting our own curses. We're all just trying to be remembered. Comment below if this story will stick with you. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not forgotten. And subscribe. Because Luna and we're still here, still choosing each other every 24 hours. And tomorrow I'll tell you what happens when Luna finds her grandmother's final journal, the one hidden in the tea shop basement, the one that might hold the real answer. But that's tomorrow's story. Tonight, just remember us. Remember that David Chen was real. Remember that Luna Alvarez loved him. Remember, even if just for 24 hours.
Story number 3.
Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you might save your life one day. And before you click away thinking this is just another made-up story, I have the medical records to prove it. The bite marks, the blood tests, everything. My therapist says I should share this. She says keeping it bottled up is why I haven't slept properly in 3 months. So, here goes. If you see bats hanging right side up, run. Don't ask questions, don't take pictures, just run. Now, let me tell you why. The story begins now. The Peterson farmhouse in Millbrook, Vermont had been on the market for 18 months when I bought it. The realtor, a chirpy woman named Diane, practically threw the keys at me when I signed the papers. Should have been my first warning. But I was too excited about the Victorian architecture and the 3 acres of apple orchard to notice. I moved in on a Tuesday in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn. That perfect New England autumn that makes you want to drink cider and wear flannel everything. The moving truck pulled away around 4 in the afternoon, leaving me alone with towers of cardboard boxes and that peculiar silence you only find in old houses. That first night, I heard them, not the bats. Not yet. Just the house. Breathing. Settling. Making those little noises that 100-year-old wood makes when the temperature drops. I unpacked my kitchen essentials, made myself instant ramen because I was too tired to cook, and crashed on the couch around 9, but sleep wouldn't come easy. The house felt expectant, like it was waiting for something. I kept hearing my grandmother's voice in my head. She'd grown up in rural Massachusetts, full of old folklore and warnings. Some houses are just wood and nails, she used to say, but others have appetites. I'd laughed at her stories back then, not laughing now. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke up at 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed. Except it chimed 13 times. Not 12, 13. The sound was wrong, too. Not the deep, resonant bong you'd expect from an antique clock. This was sharper, metallic, like someone striking a tuning fork against bone. My mouth was bone dry, the kind of thirst that makes your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth. I stumbled to the kitchen. Still half asleep. And that's when I saw them through the window. Bats. Dozens of them, hanging from the apple trees in perfect rows. But they weren't hanging upside down like bats are supposed to. They were hanging right side up. Their little feet gripping the branches like birds. Their wings wrapped around their bodies like tiny leather coats. I rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there, still wrong. Now, I'm not afraid of bats. Growing up in Connecticut, we had them in our attic every summer. Dad would chase them out with a tennis racket while Mom shrieked from the doorway. Normal bats. Normal behavior. This was different. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but the screen went black. Dead battery. Which was impossible because I'd charged it to full before bed. The bats didn't move. They just hung there, watching the house. Watching me. I must have stood at that window for 20 minutes, waiting for them to do something. Fly away, shift positions, anything. But they stayed perfectly still, like someone had glued stuffed animals to my apple trees. Eventually, exhaustion won. I convinced myself I was seeing things, maybe some weird Vermont species I'd never heard of, and went back to the couch. When I woke up the next morning, they were gone. I spent the next 3 days unpacking and trying to forget about the bats. The house was beautiful in daylight. all original hardwood floors and crown molding. The previous owners had left some furniture, including this gorgeous antique writing desk in what would become my home office. The desk had dozens of tiny drawers and compartments, the kind Victorian ladies used to store their correspondence. I spent an entire afternoon exploring them, finding old buttons, dried flowers, a fountain pen that still worked. In the bottom drawer, wrapped in tissue paper, was a journal, brown leather, dated 1892. The first entry was normal enough. Some woman named Constance writing about her garden, her husband's business trips to Boston. But by the third page, the tone changed. The peculiar birds have returned. Henry insists they are bats, but I know better. Bats do not perch as these creatures do. Bats do not watch. Last night, I caught one at my window. Its eyes, heaven help me, its eyes were not those of any earthly creature. I closed the journal, told myself it was just Victorian hysteria. Women back then got diagnosed with madness for reading too many novels. But my hands were shaking as I shoved it back in the drawer. I'm a freelance graphic designer, which is why I could afford to move to the middle of nowhere in the first place. As long as I had internet, I could work, and Millbrook had surprisingly good fiber optic, another selling point Diane had hammered home. On Friday night, I decided to explore the town. There was a little diner called Mabel's on Main Street, the kind with checkered tablecloths and pie that could make you cry. I ordered meatloaf and struck up a conversation with my waitress, a woman in her 60s named Carol. "You bought the Peterson place," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, just moved in Tuesday. How'd you know?" She refilled my coffee without asking. "Small town. We all heard someone finally took it off Diane's hands. That poor woman's been trying to unload it since..." She paused. "Well, since the Petersons left." "Why'd they leave?" Carol glanced around the mostly empty diner. "They didn't exactly leave. More like fled, middle of the night, left half their belongings. Tom Peterson called my husband to come get their chickens the next day, said they weren't coming back." My meatloaf suddenly tasted like cardboard. "Did they say why?" "Sleep deprivation, that's what Tom claimed. Said they hadn't had a decent night's rest in months. But," she lowered her voice, "Martha Peterson told me something different at church before they left. Said she kept finding things moved, little things, picture frames turned backward, books shelved upside down, coffee mugs hung from hooks with the handles facing the wrong way. That's weird, that's what I said. But Martha swore someone was coming into their house at night, rearranging things. Tom installed cameras, motion sensors, even slept in the hallway with his shotgun a few times, never caught anyone." She leaned in closer. "But here's what Martha didn't tell most folks. The night before they left, she found their wedding album. Every single photo had been replaced. Same poses, same clothes, same backgrounds. But the faces..." Carol shuddered. "The faces were different. Just slightly. Like someone had used one of those computer programs to merge their features with something else." "Did she keep the photos?" "Burned them. Said looking at them made her feel like her soul was being pulled out through her eyes." Carol straightened up as another customer entered. "Anyway, enjoy your meatloaf. And honey, maybe invest in some good locks." Carol moved on to serve another customer, leaving me alone with my cold meatloaf and racing thoughts. I paid, left a generous tip, and drove home as the sun set behind the mountains. The bats were back. This time, there were more. They covered every tree in the orchard, hundreds of them, all hanging right side up, all perfectly still, and all facing my house. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, engine running, debating whether to drive to a motel, but that felt like giving up, like letting some weird wildlife quirk chase me out of my own home. So I went inside, locked every door, checked every window, and tried to pretend everything was normal. I made it until midnight before I heard the first noise. It came from upstairs, a soft thump, like something being set down gently, then another, then footsteps. Except I live alone. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd strategically placed by my bed, a Louisville Slugger I'd had since high school, and crept toward the stairs. The footsteps stopped. The house held its breath. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Someone there?" Silence. I climbed the stairs, bat raised, heart hammering so loud I was sure whoever was up there could hear it. The hallway was empty. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot, nothing. But when I came back downstairs, my coffee mug was hanging from the kitchen hook, handle facing the wrong way. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. Every night the bats returned. Every night I heard noises, and every morning something was wrong. Not broken, not stolen, just wrong. My books, alphabetized by author, were suddenly sorted by color. The bathroom towels I'd folded in thirds were refolded in halves. My spice rack, organized from A to Z, was rearranged by bottle height. I started taking pictures, videos, documentation of everything before I went to bed and after I woke up. But here's the thing, the camera never caught anything happening. I'd set it to record all night, and in the morning, I'd find 8 hours of empty footage. Except the timestamps were wrong. Instead of showing 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., they showed 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Even though I knew I'd started recording at night. By day 4, I was running on pure adrenaline and gas station coffee. My hands shook constantly. I jumped at every creak and groan. And the bats, God, the bats, they were getting closer. They'd started on the trees at the edge of the property. Now they lined the trees nearest the house, still hanging right side up, still motionless, still wrong. But I'd noticed something else, patterns in their arrangement. They weren't random. Looking down from my bedroom window, they formed shapes, symbols, almost like a language written in bodies and wings. I started sketching them, filled a whole notebook trying to decode what they meant. Circles within circles, intersecting lines, geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. My college roommate had been a math major. She used to talk about non-Euclidean geometry, shapes that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. That's what these reminded me of. On the 5th night, I tried something desperate. I set up speakers in every window, blasted ultrasonic frequencies, the kind that's supposed to repel bats, regular bats. The things on my trees didn't even flinch. But something else happened. As the sound waves hit them, they flickered, like a TV with bad reception. For just a second, I saw through them, saw the mechanical frameworks inside, the wire mesh, the tiny cameras where eyes should be, the speakers in their throats, and behind them, shadowy figures standing among the trees. Tall, too tall, watching, waiting. I turned off the speakers, the bats solidified again. The shadows disappeared, but I knew they were still there, had always been there. The bats were just, what, camouflage? Distractions? I called an exterminator, a guy named Rick from 2 towns over. He took one look at the bats through binoculars and backed away slowly. Those aren't. He shook his head. Lady, I've been doing this for 23 years. I've never seen anything like that. Bats don't. They can't. Their anatomy doesn't work that way. So what do I do? He was already walking back to his truck. Move. Wait. I ran after him. You can't just leave. I'm paying you to... No amount of money is worth this. He threw his equipment in the truck bed, didn't even secure it properly. You want some advice? Real advice? Check your carbon monoxide detectors. Check for gas leaks. Hell, check the damn water. Because if those things are real, he looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw fear in his eyes. If those things are real, then you're already in trouble bigger than pest control can handle. He peeled out of my driveway, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. I stood there watching his truck disappear, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. That afternoon, I did what any rational person would do. I Googled it. Bats hanging right side up Vermont. Nothing. Bats upright position. Just articles about normal bat behavior. Millbrook, Vermont, strange animals. Still nothing. But then I tried Millbrook, Vermont, missing families. 17 results. 17 families who'd left Millbrook suddenly over the past 40 years. Always from rural properties. Always leaving belongings behind. Always in autumn. My hands were trembling as I clicked through the articles. The Hendersons in 1987, the Washingtons in 93, the Kowalskis in 2001. Different reporters, different decades. But the stories were eerily similar. Families fleeing in the night. Vague mentions of personal reasons or family emergencies. And in 3 of the articles, blurry background photos that showed trees. Trees with dark shapes that could have been shadows, could have been birds, could have been bats hanging the wrong way. That night, I finally saw them. Not the bats. The things pretending to be bats. I'd positioned myself at the kitchen window with a pair of night vision binoculars I'd panic bought on Amazon. As midnight approached, the bats began to move. Not flying, climbing, using their wings like hands, their feet like something else. They descended from the trees in perfect synchronization. Hundreds of them, moving toward the house in neat rows like an army of shadows. But as they got closer, I realized they weren't animals at all. They were constructs. That's the only word I can think of. Made of leather and wire and something that gleamed like metal in the moonlight. Their eyes weren't eyes. They were tiny cameras. Red lights blinking in sequence. I dropped the binoculars. Ran for my car keys. But when I yanked open the front door, one was hanging on my porch. Right side up. Inches from my face. Up close, I could see the seams where it had been stitched together. Could hear the tiny mechanical whir of its internal mechanisms. Could smell the oil and copper and something else. Something organic. It spoke. Not with a mouth. It didn't have a real mouth, but through a small speaker embedded in its chest. Previous tenants non-compliant. New tenant evaluation in progress. Please return inside for assessment. I slammed the door, ran for the back exit. But they were there too, covering every window, every door. A living surveillance network of impossible creatures. Assessment beginning in 5, 4, 3. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran to the basement. The one place in the house I hadn't fully explored yet. There was an old root cellar down there, walls of stone, and a heavy wooden door that locked from the inside. I made it just as I heard them entering the house above. Hundreds of tiny feet, mechanical wings brushing against walls. That same voice multiplied into a chorus, counting down. 2, 1, assessment initiated. I spent 3 days in that root cellar. 3 days listening to them tear apart my house. Not violently, methodically. I could hear furniture being moved, floorboards being lifted, walls being opened. They were looking for something. Or maybe building something. The root cellar had canned goods from the previous owners. Pickles and preserves dated 2019. A case of bottled water. An old camping toilet in the corner. And scratched into the wooden door, a message. They're not bats, they're scouts. Don't let them complete the assessment. Tom P. Below that, in different handwriting, Day 2, they can mimic voices. Don't trust anyone who calls you up. MP. And below that, scratched so deep it had splintered the wood. They're in the walls, they're in the walls, they're in the... I found other things, too. A pile of newspapers from 1987, the year the Hendersons left. Headlines about power outages, unusual meteor showers. 3 paragraphs buried on page 6 about atmospheric anomalies over Millbrook. There was a toolbox with basic supplies, flashlights, batteries, and a notebook. Tom Peterson's handwriting again, pages and pages of observations. October 3rd. They arrived 2 weeks ago, always between midnight and 3 a.m. They're mapping the property. I can see the grid pattern when they move. October 9th. Martha thinks I'm losing it. But I found one. Dead? Deactivated? It was behind the water heater. Took it apart. Circuit boards, fiber optics, tech that shouldn't exist. Who builds surveillance drones that look like bats? October 15th. Power company says our usage has tripled. We're not using more electricity. Something else is. Something in the walls. October 18th. They got into the house last night. Didn't take anything. Just recorded. I could hear the whirring. Found tiny holes drilled in the ceiling. Perfect circles. Millimeter wide. October 22nd. Martha saw them too. Not bats. The things that control the bats. She won't stop crying. We're leaving tonight. If someone finds this, don't try to understand. Just run. The last entry was different. Shaky. Desperate. They're offering something. Integration, they call it. A better way to exist. Part of me, God help me, part of me wants to say yes. The dreams they send are so beautiful. A world where everything is perfect. Efficient. Optimized. No more chaos, no more fear. Just purpose, just order. Just, the entry ended mid-sentence. On the morning of the 4th day, the noises stopped. I waited another 6 hours before venturing out. The basement was empty. I crept up the stairs. Baseball bat clutched like a lifeline, and found my house transformed. Everything was optimized. That's the only way to describe it. Furniture arranged for maximum efficiency. Books sorted by some algorithm I couldn't understand. Even my food had been reorganized. Proteins with proteins. Carbohydrates with carbohydrates, everything labeled with tiny tags showing nutritional information. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the album on my coffee table. A photo album that hadn't been there before. Filled with pictures of me, hundreds of them, me sleeping, me eating, me showering, pictures from inside my house, but taken before I moved in. The last page had a note. Assessment complete. Subject suitable for integration. Collection scheduled for Lunar Phase 3.7. Welcome to the Millbrook Protocol. I looked up Lunar Phase 3.7 on my phone. Tonight. Moonrise at 11:47 p.m. I had 8 hours. I threw everything I could carry into my car. Clothes, laptop, important documents, the photo album, because who would believe me without evidence? As I loaded the trunk, I noticed my neighbor across the street, Mr. Chen, watching from his window. He raised his coffee mug in a little salute. The handle was facing the wrong way. I drove, didn't stop until I hit the Massachusetts border, found a motel, paid cash, and finally, collapsed into a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled like cigarettes and disinfectant but felt safer than any place I'd been in a week. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The mechanical bats, the photo album, Mr. Chen's coffee mug. So I did something stupid. I called Diane, the realtor. She answered on the first ring, at 1 a.m. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. No hello, no surprise at the late hour. Did they complete the assessment? My blood turned to ice. You knew. You knew what was in that house. Every town has its purpose, she said. Her voice was different now, flat, mechanical. Millbrook's purpose is evaluation. We identify suitable candidates. The houses are testing grounds. The bats are phase 1. Why? My voice cracked. Why me? Because you noticed. Most people, their minds won't let them see the wrongness. They explain it away, rationalize, but you saw them for what they were. That makes you special, valuable, worth integrating. I'm hanging up. You can't run from what's already inside you, she said. Check your left arm, just below the elbow. Feel for the bump. I dropped the phone, ran to the bathroom, turned on every light, and there, just below my elbow, was a tiny raised mark, like a mosquito bite, but perfectly circular, millimeter wide. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. The motel room was dark, too dark, the kind of darkness that has weight, substance. I reached for the lamp, and my hand touched leather. They'd found me, not the mechanical bats, the things that made them, the things that ran the Millbrook protocol. I can't describe them properly. Your brain doesn't want to process what they look like. Imagine if someone turned a person inside out, then taught it to fly, then gave it too many eyes, all in the wrong places. Integration beginning, they said, not with voices, with thoughts, directly into my head. You have been selected for preservation. Your consciousness will be distributed among the collective. Your form will be optimized. Resistance reduces efficiency. I screamed, fought, thrashed against the leather wings wrapped around me like a cocoon, but there were too many, too strong, too wrong. Then, sirens, police sirens, getting closer. The things made a sound, frustration, anger, and suddenly I was falling. Hit the motel carpet hard enough to knock the wind out of me. By the time I could breathe again, they were gone. Nothing left but the smell of copper and motor oil. The motel manager had called the cops, said I'd been screaming for 20 minutes straight. The officers took one look at me, at the bite marks on my arms, the tears in my clothes, the stark terror in my eyes, and drove me straight to the hospital. That was 3 months ago. The doctors say it was a psychotic break, stress from the move, isolation. Maybe something in the well water at the old house. They have explanations for everything. The bite marks? Self-inflicted. The photos? Elaborate forgeries my mind created. The mechanical bats? Hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation. I tried showing them the album, but when I opened it, nothing. Just empty pages, like it had never been filled at all. They released me after 2 weeks of observation. I'm living with my sister in Hartford now, seeing a therapist twice a week, taking little white pills that make the world feel like it's wrapped in cotton. But I know what I know. The Millbrook protocol is real. The things that pretend to be bats are real, and they're still out there, assessing, collecting, integrating. I check the news sometimes, looking for reports of strange wildlife, of people disappearing from small towns, of bats hanging the wrong way. Last week, I found an article. A family in Oregon fled their home in the middle of the night, claimed they were being watched by unnatural creatures. The locals think they're crazy. But I noticed something in the background of the news photo, in the trees behind their abandoned house. Shadows, hanging in neat rows, right side up. So please, I'm begging you, if you see them, don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Don't wait for proof. Just run. Get as far away as you can. And whatever you do, don't let them complete their assessment. Because I've been having dreams lately. Dreams where I'm back in that root cellar. Only this time the door won't lock, and I can hear them coming. Hundreds of mechanical feet. Leather wings. That voice counting down. 3, 2, 1. I wake up at 2:47 a.m. every night now. My coffee mug is always on the nightstand, handle facing the wrong way. They're not done with me. And if you've listened this far, if you've heard my whole story, they might not be done with you either. Because here's something I didn't mention. Something I'm only now starting to understand. The Millbrook Protocol isn't just about one town. It's spreading. Remember those 17 families who fled over 40 years? I tracked down 3 of them, called them, pretended to be a journalist doing a story on rural Vermont. 2 hung up the moment I mentioned Millbrook. But the third, an elderly man named Joseph Kowalski, he talked. Boy, did he talk. They follow you, he said. Once you've been assessed, you're in their system. Took us 15 years to shake them. 15 years of moving, different states, different names, but they always found us, always sent their scouts. How did you finally escape? Long pause. Who says we escaped? They just changed tactics. Stopped being obvious. But sometimes I still wake up at 2:47, still find things moved. And my grandson, bright kid, he's been having dreams. Dreams about efficiency, about optimization, about joining something bigger than himself. What are they? I asked. What do they want? They're collectors, he whispered. Of consciousness, of potential. Earth is just a laboratory, and we're the specimens. They're looking for the right traits, the right minds. For what purpose? His laugh was bitter. Does the lab rat ever really understand the experiment? The call dropped. When I tried calling back, the number was disconnected. So maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe the doctors are wrong. Maybe those little white pills are just keeping me docile while they complete their work. Because last week, I found something under the skin of my left arm, right where Diane said it would be. The bump had grown, spread, like tiny wires under my skin, forming patterns, circuits. I went for an x-ray, told them I thought I'd broken my arm. But when the technician developed the film, nothing. Clean bones. No wires, no implants. She looked at me like I was insane, but I can feel them, moving, growing, building something inside me. And the dreams, God, the dreams are getting stronger. Beautiful visions of a world without chaos, without fear, without the messy inefficiencies of human existence. Just perfect order. Perfect purpose. Part of me wants to give in, to stop fighting, to let them complete whatever they started in that house. But I'm recording this as a warning, as proof, as a last act of defiance before whatever comes next. Check your arms, check your coffee mugs, watch the trees at night, and remember, if you see bats hanging right side up, run, while you still can, while you're still you. Sweet dreams. Comment below if you've ever seen anything that shouldn't exist. Has your house ever felt watched? Do your belongings move when you're not looking? And if you made it all the way through, if you're lying in bed right now wondering if that shadow outside your window is just a tree, hit subscribe, because this is just the beginning. I have more stories, more warnings, more things that hide in small towns and old houses. You just have to ask yourself, do you really want to know? Oh, this here. Story number 4. The contractor's truck pulled away this morning. That makes 4 of them now. 4 different contractors who've walked off the job, each one mumbling the same excuse about scheduling conflicts or unexpected emergencies. But I saw it in their eyes. That same look, the way they'd glance at the walls when they thought I wasn't watching, the way their hands would tremble, holding their tools. I'm starting to think maybe they're right to leave. Before I tell you what's been happening in this house, I need you to do something for me. Look around your room right now. Really look. See how the walls meet the ceiling, how everything fits together the way it should. Hold on to that feeling. Because once you hear what I've discovered living here, you'll never look at your own walls the same way again. And if you're listening to this alone, in the dark, well, maybe check that your walls aren't listening too. Now, let me tell you how this all started. 6 months ago, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. A Victorian-era house in Burlington, Vermont, listed at half the market value. The real estate agent, Sandra, kept adjusting her glasses nervously as she showed me around. "It needs work," she said, her voice pitched a little too high. The previous owners, they left rather suddenly. The house sat on Maple Street, one of those tree-lined roads where American flags wave from every other porch. Picture perfect, except for this place. While the neighbors had pristine white picket fences and manicured lawns, this house seemed to slouch, like it was trying to sink into the earth. But I saw potential, I always do. I'm Marcus Chen, and I flip houses for a living. Been doing it for 12 years across New England. This would be my 37th renovation. I was keeping count. Should have known better when I saw that number. The interior was a time capsule. Original hardwood floors that creaked with every step. Crown molding thick with decades of paint and wallpaper. God, so much wallpaper. Layer upon layer like sedimentary rock formed from different eras of questionable taste. "The price is firm," Sandra said, practically throwing the keys at me, "and the sale is as is, no inspection contingencies." I should have walked away, but standing in that musty living room, breathing in the smell of old wood and forgotten memories, I felt something. Not dread, not then, more like anticipation, like the house was holding its breath. I signed the papers that afternoon. The first week was normal. I mean, as normal as any renovation gets. I started with the basics, clearing out the old furniture left behind, setting up my tools in what would become the workshop. The house seemed to settle around me, creaking and groaning the way old houses do. I'd work late into the evening, Vermont Public Radio playing on my portable speaker, the sound echoing through empty rooms. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming along, and then stop. Because it sounded like the house was humming back, just the acoustics, I told myself. Old houses make weird sounds. The first sign something was wrong came when I tried to remove the wallpaper in the master bedroom. I'd done this dozens of times before. Score the paper, apply the solution, wait, then peel. Simple. But this wallpaper, it wouldn't budge. I tried everything. Steam, chemicals, even a heat gun. The paper would bubble and warp, but the moment I tried to pull it away, it would resist, like it was alive, like it was part of the wall itself. "Probably just really old adhesive," I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. But when I looked closer, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The wallpaper pattern, it was moving. Not obviously, not like a horror movie, just shifting. What I thought were roses in the pattern would look like faces when I glanced away. The vines seemed to grow between my visits to the room. And there was writing. Tiny script hidden in the design that I could never quite read. I decided to start with a different room. The kitchen should have been easy. Tear out the old cabinets, update the electrical, install new appliances. I'd done it 36 times before. But the house, it had opinions. I removed the first cabinet on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was back. Not similar, the exact same cabinet, down to the scratch on the third door where someone had carved 1,952 inches into the wood. I stood there, tool belt heavy on my hips, staring at that impossible cabinet. My hands were still sore from prying it off the wall. The debris was still in the dumpster outside, but here it was, like I'd never touched it. "Okay," I said to the empty kitchen. "Okay, there's an explanation for this." There wasn't. I tried again the next day. This time I watched, removed the cabinet, carried it outside myself, threw it in the dumpster, came back inside, and froze. The cabinet was back, but I'd only been gone 30 seconds. That's when I called the first contractor. Big guy named Bill, ran a crew out of Montpelier. He looked at my kitchen, looked at me, and laughed. "You trying to prank me, Chen? This kitchen hasn't been touched." I showed him the work order. Showed him the photos I'd taken of the empty wall where the cabinets had been. He squinted at my phone, then at the wall, then back at my phone. That's not possible," he said. "That's what I thought." Bill's crew lasted 3 days. They'd tear something down, turn around, and it would be back. Walls they demoed would be standing pristine. Flooring they'd ripped up would be perfectly intact. On the 3rd day, Bill pulled me aside. His face was pale, and I noticed his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette, even though he'd told me he'd quit years ago. "The house doesn't want to change," he said, words coming out in a rush. "I've been in construction 30 years, and my guys are spooked." Tommy swears he saw the drywall rebuilding itself, like watching a video in reverse. "Bill, come on." "I'm done, Marcus, I'm done. Keep the deposit, just don't call us again." The second contractor was more skeptical. Amanda Liu, highly recommended, ran her business with military precision. She brought in a bigger crew, industrial equipment, even cameras to document the work. "We'll figure out what's going on," she assured me. "Probably some kind of structural issue causing optical illusions." They started with the bathroom, gutted it completely in one afternoon. Tiles, fixtures, even the old clawfoot tub that must have weighed 300 pounds. Amanda personally supervised every step, documenting with photos and video. We locked the house that night, set up cameras, motion sensors, the works. The next morning, the bathroom was back. Not just back, pristine. The clawfoot tub gleamed, the tiles sparkled, and there was fresh water in the tub, still steaming, with a folded towel placed neatly on the edge. Amanda reviewed the footage with me. For 8 hours, nothing. Then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the cameras went dark. Not broken, just dark. When they came back online at 3:34, the bathroom was restored. 1 minute, Amanda whispered. It rebuilt an entire bathroom in 1 minute. Her crew quit that day. Amanda lasted 2 more, trying to find a logical explanation. But when she attempted to update the electrical panel and found the new wires had somehow aged 60 years overnight, she packed up. "Some houses don't want to be saved," she told me. "Let this one be." But I couldn't. I'd sunk everything into this house. My savings, my reputation, my pride. And more than that, I needed to understand. Late at night, I'd walk through the rooms with my flashlight, listening. The house was never quiet. Always settling, always adjusting. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like footsteps upstairs when I was in the basement. Sometimes I'd hear hammering when all my tools were locked away. I started sleeping there. Told myself it was to save money on the motel, but really, I needed to know what the house did when no one was watching. That's when things got worse. Living in the house was like being slowly digested. Each morning, I'd wake up feeling like the walls had moved closer in the night. My sleeping bag, which I'd set up in the living room, would be in different spots. Never dramatically. Just a few inches here, a foot there. Like the house was adjusting me. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. The way doors I'd left open would be closed. The way rooms felt different sizes on different days. The way my tools would go missing, only to turn up in places I'd never been. The third contractor, Mike Peterson, brought a priest. I'm not religious, but at that point I was willing to try anything. Father O'Brien was young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and steady hands. He walked through each room, not performing an exorcism, just observing. "It's not malevolent," he finally said. "Not exactly. It's more like protective. Like it's keeping something the way it needs to be." "Protective of what?" I asked. He pointed to the walls. Have you noticed the patterns? Not just in the wallpaper, in everything. The way the floorboards are laid, the way the doors are hung. It's all very specific. Mike's crew tried anyway. They were the most aggressive yet, bringing in heavy machinery. They managed to tear down an entire wall between the kitchen and dining room. I watched it fall, felt the dust in my lungs, saw daylight where there had been shadows. For about 10 minutes I had an open floor plan. Then I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a vibration. Like the house was humming at a frequency just below human hearing. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. And then, the wall rebuilt itself. Not slowly, not mysteriously in the night. Right in front of us, in broad daylight. Studs materialized from nothing. Drywall flowed like liquid into place. Paint spread across surfaces like living things. Mike's crew ran, actually ran, leaving thousands of dollars of equipment behind. Mike himself backed away slowly, his face the color of old paper. I've seen enough, he said. Whatever's in this house, it doesn't want to be disturbed, and I'm not going to be the one to force it. That night, alone again, I sat in the kitchen with a bottle of bourbon and my journal. 3 contractors down. Tens of thousands of dollars wasted, and I was no closer to understanding why the house wouldn't let me change it. I must have dozed off because I woke to find something written in my journal. Not my handwriting. Older, more formal. You're trying to fix what isn't broken. My hands shook as I turned the page. More writing appeared as I watched, the pen moving by itself across paper. The house remembers. The house preserves. The house protects. Protects what? I said out loud, my voice cracking. The pen moved again. The agreement. I spent the next week researching the house's history. City records, newspaper archives, anything I could find. The house was built in 1889 by a man named Josiah Whitmore. Normal enough. But there were gaps. Years where no records existed. And every owner after Whitmore had left suddenly, usually within a year. The break came from an unlikely source. Mrs. Patterson from next door, 93 years old and sharp as a tack. She invited me over for tea and told me stories her grandmother had told her. The Whitmore house has always been strange, she said, her fingers wrapped around a delicate china cup. My grandmother said Josiah Whitmore made a deal. Not with the devil. Nothing so dramatic, with the house itself. That doesn't make sense. She smiled. Doesn't it? Haven't you felt it? The house is alive, Mr. Chen, and it has a very specific way it wants to exist. Josiah promised to preserve it, and in exchange. In exchange for what? Safety. Sanctuary. A place that would always be exactly as it needs to be. The house keeps its end of the bargain. It stays standing, stays strong, but it expects the same in return. I thought about all the things I'd tried to change. The wallpaper that wouldn't peel. The cabinets that returned. The walls that rebuilt themselves. So I can't renovate it? Mrs. Patterson sipped her tea. Oh, you can, but only the changes it wants. The house will let you fix what's truly broken. A leaking pipe, faulty wiring, but try to change its essence, try to make it something it's not. Well, you've seen what happens. The 4th contractor arrived this morning. David Reeves, recommended by Amanda. I told him everything. Showed him the videos, the journal, explained what the other contractors had experienced. He listened without judgment, then said something that surprised me. I've seen this before. Not exactly this, but old houses with personalities. You're fighting it, and that's why it's fighting back. So, what do? Work with it. Listen to what it wants. We started small. Instead of tearing out the kitchen cabinets, we cleaned them. Polished the old wood until it gleamed. The house seemed to purr, that low vibration now feeling pleased rather than threatening. We fixed the genuinely broken things. The leaking pipe in the basement. The cracked window in the attic. The house allowed these repairs, even seemed grateful. The tools stopped disappearing. The rooms stopped shifting. But when David suggested updating the electrical panel to modern standards, we found the new panel aged overnight. Not to uselessness, but to exactly match the aesthetic of the house. Still functional, still safe, but looking like it had always been there. "See," David said. "It's compromising, meeting you halfway." I found more writing in my journal last night, different this time. Less formal, more conversational. You're learning. The previous ones never learned. They ran or went mad or simply gave up. But you're still here. I wrote back, "What are you?" "I am preservation. I am memory. I am the promise Josiah made, held in wood and stone and glass." What happened to Josiah? He kept his promise. Lived here 67 years, died in the master bedroom, in the bed he built with his own hands. I keep that room exactly as it was the day he passed. It's my way of honoring him. And the others, the owners who left? They didn't understand. Tried to force change. I protected myself. But you're beginning to see. I stared at the words appearing on the page, my heart racing, but my fear fading. The house wasn't malevolent. It was just stubborn, set in its ways, protective of its identity. "What if we work together?" I wrote. "I'll preserve your essence, but let me fix what's wearing down. Let me make you strong again, but keep you, you." For a long moment, nothing. Then slowly, "Show me." David and I spent the next hours walking through the house, discussing each room. Not what I wanted to change, but what the house needed. The foundation had cracks. The house let us repair them. The roof needed reinforcement. Approved. But always, always, in ways that preserved the original character. We found compromises. The bathroom could be updated for safety, but the clawfoot tub stayed. The kitchen appliances could be modernized, but hidden behind panels that matched the original cabinetry. The electrical could be brought up to code, but run through vintage-looking conduits. It was the strangest renovation I'd ever done. Instead of imposing my vision, I was negotiating. Every decision was a conversation. Sometimes I'd present an idea and feel that resistant vibration. Other times, the house would actually guide us. A wall would creak right where we needed to run new plumbing, or a floorboard would pop up to reveal exactly where the old pipes were failing. David's crew adapted quickly. They learned to read the house's moods, to sense when they were pushing too hard. They started talking to it, the way you talk to a skittish animal. "Morning, house. We're going to work on the north wall today, just reinforcing, nothing drastic." And it worked. Day by day, room by room, we strengthened and preserved rather than transformed. The house began to trust us. Doors that had been stuck for decades suddenly opened smoothly. Windows that had been painted shut for years loosened on their own. 3 weeks into this new approach, I made a discovery. Working in the attic, reinforcing the beams, I found a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather journal. Josiah Whitmore's journal. His handwriting was precise, dated 1889. The agreement is made. This house will stand as a testament to craftsmanship, to the belief that some things should not be swept away by the tide of progress. In exchange for my promise to preserve and protect, the house promises to shelter and endure. We are partners now, and I suspect we always will be. Later entries detailed the relationship. How the house would guide him to problems before they became serious. How it would protect him from storms, from intruders, from the chaos of the outside world, and how, in return, he never tried to change its fundamental nature. The final entry, dated 1956. I am old now, and my time grows short. But I do not fear. The house and I have kept our bargain. It will remember me, as I have remembered it. And perhaps one day another will come who understands, who sees not a structure to be conquered but a living thing to be cherished. If you are reading this, you may be that person. Listen, learn, preserve, and you will find not just a house, but a home unlike any other. I closed the journal. Tears I didn't expect blurring my vision. I understood now. The house wasn't refusing renovation out of stubbornness. It was testing, waiting, looking for someone who would continue Josiah's promise. I understand, I said to the empty attic. I understand now. The house creaked, but it sounded like satisfaction. David's truck pulled away this morning, but not in defeat. The work is done, or rather, the work has begun. Because maintaining this house, preserving it while keeping it living and functional, that's not a job that ends. It's a relationship. I'm writing this from the master bedroom, Josiah's room. The wallpaper I tried so hard to remove now seems beautiful in its age. The patterns don't look like faces anymore. They look like memories. The writing hidden in the vines, I can read it now. Names and dates of everyone who ever lived here, loved here, found shelter here. Tomorrow I'll add my name. The house still does things that would terrify most people. Doors open on their own to guide me to problems. Tools appear where I need them. Sometimes I wake to find small repairs have been done in the night. The house taking care of itself, or maybe taking care of me. But I'm not scared anymore. I'm home. If you're listening to this, still awake in your bed, maybe you understand too. Maybe you felt it in your own walls. That sense that houses are more than wood and stone. They're repositories of memory, guardians of the past, partners in our present. Or maybe you think I've lost my mind. That's okay too. But I have one question for you. Have you ever noticed how your house sounds at night? The settling, the creaking, the little noises you dismiss as just the house. What if it's trying to tell you something? What if it's waiting for you to listen? Comment below if your house has ever seemed alive. If you've ever felt like the walls were watching, or the rooms were shifting, or the very air was trying to communicate. Share your stories. Subscribe if you want to hear more about what the house teaches me. Because this isn't the end. Living in a house that's truly alive, that has opinions and memories and needs. Every day brings new discoveries, new negotiations, new understanding. The contractor's truck pulled away this morning, but I'm still here. The house and I, we're still here, and we're just getting started. Sweet dreams. And listen to your walls tonight. You never know what they might be trying to tell you. Wait, before you go, before you close your eyes and drift off, I need to tell you what happened last week. What made me realize the house's protection goes deeper than I ever imagined. I woke at 3:33 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass downstairs. Not the house's usual settling. This was different, sharp, violent, wrong. My heart hammered as I grabbed the baseball bat I keep beside the bed. A Louisville Slugger my dad gave me when I made varsity in high school. Funny how we cling to these totems of safety. The stairs didn't creak as I descended. They never do anymore. The house knows when I need silence. The air grew colder with each step, but not the supernatural cold I'd grown used to. This was different, defensive. In the living room, I found him. A man in dark clothes, glass from the window scattered around his feet like deadly snow. He was trying to pry open the antique secretary desk where I'd been foolish enough to leave cash from selling some of the salvaged materials. "Don't move," I said, raising the bat. He spun around, and I saw the knife in his hand. One of those tactical things, all black angles and malice. My mouth went dry. "Just back away, man," he said. "I'll take what I came for and go." But as he stepped forward, the house responded. The floorboard beneath his foot didn't just creak, it buckled, bent upward like a living thing, catching his ankle. He stumbled, cursing, and that's when the real show began. Every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. The sound was like thunder, like judgment. The lights flickered, not going out, but pulsing in a rhythm I recognized. The house's heartbeat, its war drum, The intruder's eyes went wide. What the hell? The wallpaper began to move. Not subtly this time. The patterns writhed and twisted, faces emerging from the roses, reaching out with thorny fingers. The air itself grew thick, pressing down on him like an invisible hand. I'd run, I told him. Now. He tried, but the house wasn't done. As he lunged for the broken window, the walls themselves seemed to exhale, a wind that shouldn't exist indoors pushing him back. The knife flew from his hand, embedding itself in the exact center of a floorboard that immediately grew over it, swallowing the weapon like quicksand. That's when he started screaming. Not from pain, from terror, because the house was showing him something. I couldn't see what, but I could see its effect. His face went pale, then gray, then a color I don't have a name for. The kind of color fear paints on a human face when it strips away every pretense. "It knows," he whispered. "It knows what I've done. It knows everything." The front door swung open, not violently, almost politely. An invitation to leave, or else. He ran. Ran like hell itself was chasing him, leaving behind only blood from the window glass and the echo of his terror. I heard his van peel out, tires screaming against asphalt. I stood there in my pajamas, baseball bat hanging useless at my side, as the house settled back to normal. The lights steadied, the wallpaper stilled, the air thinned to breathable. "Thank you," I whispered. The house creaked once. Acknowledgement, protection, partnership. I called the police, of course, reported the break-in. But when Officer Martinez arrived, he found something interesting. The man's knife wasn't just swallowed by the floorboard. It had been transformed. The wood had grown around and through it, turning weapon into art, into warning. "Strangest thing I've ever seen," Martinez said, taking photos. "It's like the house itself fought back." If only he knew. They caught the intruder 3 days later, 2 states away. Bobby Thorne, wanted for a string of burglaries targeting old houses. Valuable antiques, he'd told them. Easy marks, he'd said. But not this house. Never this house. Martinez called to tell me something else, too. "Funny thing," he said. "Thorne keeps babbling about what he saw in your house. Says the walls showed him every crime he ever committed. Every face of every victim. Says he can't close his eyes without seeing them. Doc thinks he's having a psychotic break." I hung up and touched the nearest wall. Warm, like skin, like loyalty. "You didn't just protect me," I said. "You delivered justice." The journal appeared on my desk that night, open to a fresh page. Words in that old-fashioned script. "Those who come with ill intent see their true selves reflected. The house remembers all who enter. Guards those who guard it. This has always been the deeper promise." I thought about all the families who'd lived here, all the children who'd grown up safe, all the storms weathered, the dangers deflected, the sanctuary provided. This house wasn't just alive. It was a sentinel, a guardian, a judge, and I was its keeper now. Some nights I lie awake and think about all the houses out there. Millions of them, sheltering families, holding memories, standing against time and weather and worse things. How many of them are like this one? How many are waiting for someone to listen, to understand, to partner with them in the ancient compact between human and home? Maybe yours is one of them. Maybe that settling you here isn't random. Maybe that door that never stays closed is trying to show you something. Maybe that room that always feels different has a story to tell. Or maybe I've just merged so completely with this house that I can't tell where I end and it begins anymore. Maybe that's what happens when you truly listen to your walls. You become part of them and they become part of you. But I'll tell you this. I sleep better now than I ever have. Because I know I'm protected. Not by locks or alarms or human systems, but by something older. something that stood for over a century and plans to stand for centuries more. The contractor's truck pulled away this morning, but new ones will come, not to change the house, to help me preserve it, to ensure it stands long after I'm gone, waiting for the next person who'll listen, who'll understand, who'll keep the promise. Because that's what home really is, isn't it? Not just shelter, not just walls and roof. It's a living promise between us and the spaces that hold our lives. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember this story. Remember that somewhere in Burlington, Vermont, a house and a man have found perfect understanding. And maybe, just maybe, wonder what your own walls might be trying to tell you. They're always talking, you know. The question is, are you brave enough to listen? Comment below if you felt something shift in your room while listening to this. Share if you know someone who needs to hear this message. And subscribe, because the house has more stories to tell, and I'm finally ready to share them. Until next time, sweet dreams, and remember, your house is listening too.